Hi, everyone. My name is Eileen Henke. I am the SEPTA president for this school year. Before we start our presentation with Dr. Comiskey, as a general membership meeting, we go over our budget, and I have two announcements. Currently, the SEPTA budget's around $23,055. We will be participating in the senior awards in June. In the past year, we've done contributions to the GC for a Cure, middle school game and bingo nights, victory games, and we've partnered with PTA for grants, including flexible seating at the middle school. We're happy to hear that the Autism Ball will be back this year in late June. We will be working with the Griffith family as we have in the past. Currently, SEPTA is looking for committee volunteers, especially at the primaries, curriculum. So please email the president or membership@gcsepta.org. Tonight, there's an all schools PTA meeting, 7:30 at the high school. Middle school. And don't forget, next Tuesday, May 17th, is the vote for Board of Ed. And the children get to vote on their themes for their schools. Hi. So I just wanted to introduce Dr. Michael Comiskey. He's a psychologist, BCBA, LVA, ABA certified to work with kids with developmental disabilities. He has worked with several agencies and districts across Long Island and New York City, from special ed teacher to parent training, worked with school psychologists and behavior consultants. And additionally, with his private practice, he is currently working with us at Garden City. Ready?
No need for applause.
I know.
For everybody who's at good morning, everyone. I don't see many people's faces on the screen, but I'm going to be primarily talking to you guys. So I'm hoping to kind of keep this like a conversation, if you don't mind. And Mrs. Dickey, I think, will be taking the questions on the Zoom. So if anybody has any questions, just type it in the chat. And we'll try and answer it. I would like to keep it as conversational as possible. And hopefully we can zip through some of the slides, and then we could talk about just anything that you guys might have questions about behavior. I know, Ms. Cardone, you're over at Homestead. Where are you guys, if you don't mind me asking? Where are your kids? Stratford. Okay. And what about you? Where's your child? Stratford. 2 Stratford. All right. Good. Yep. We were talking 3. Yes. That's right. Okay, good.
Oh, okay.
Stewart. Okay, good. You got high school over there too. Thank you for the introduction. I am Michael Comiskey. I've been a school psychologist for 18 years. I was 17 years out in Northport. And there was a shift in the way that they were using psychologists out there. So after an evening, I put my resume onto OLAS, and Garden City came calling, and I'm here now. And the way that Garden City presented it to me is they really wanted me to work with the kids, with the families, doing the stuff that I love, and it was just super enticing. So I left the comfort of Northport, and I'm hoping to finish out my career in Garden City. Prior to Northport, I was, like it was already mentioned, I had worked for a whole bunch of agencies where I was low man on the totem pole, and slowly just worked my way up to like a program director and director of home programs and parent trainer and consultant. Yeah, I just kind of went through the gamut of just the experiences. Got my bachelor's over in psychology in Scranton, beautiful Scranton, Pennsylvania. 86 days of sunshine. I don't think I saw any of them there. It was rather depressing. I'm so glad I got out of there in 4 years. That was like the highlight of Scranton. Got out of there in 4 years. And then I went up to Rhode Island. Up in Rhode Island, that's where I kind of learned about behavior. I started, my uncle had a private practice up there with like 6 satellite offices, and he had a whole bunch of connections with group homes up there. And that was my first dive into real, true behavior management. I worked for a group home for 8 adolescent boys with differing needs. They were either coming from like a juvenile detention on their way home or going from home to the juvenile detention. And I experienced a bunch of behaviors there. That's where I was kind of introduced to point level systems and positive reinforcement, and unfortunately CPI training and things like that. I was taking a couple classes at University of Rhode Island, and one of the professors was a school psychologist, and was just talking to her. I said, I want to be where you're at some point. Where were you at my stage? And she introduced me to this guy, Dr. Dennis Mozingo. You can Google him. He's fairly well known in the field, or at least was. Eventually became president, I think, of NYSABA, which is New York State Applied Behavior Analysis, something or other. I didn't know who he was, and he told me to come over to his program, and I did. And he said, "Have you ever heard of autism?" I said, "I have. I've read about it. I've never really, worked with kids with autism." He said, "Well, spend the day and tell me if you are interested at the end of the day." So I spent 6 hours there, and I just watched this intensive training for some of the more severely disabled kids with autism. I would say ages 3 through 9 or so. And at the end of the day, he had asked me, he's like, "So what do you think?" And I said, I'm in 100%. I still say that to this day. And I think back then I was getting paid, I don't know, $6.50 an hour, but it was just so much more. But it hooked me in. I didn't know who he was, but I did find out after that when I got into St. John's for my master's. I was coming back and I started getting recruited by these agencies like CUSAC and AHRC. And the reason they were recruiting me was because of the way he trained me. I didn't know that. I didn't know that he was so just good at what he did. But I was trained really well in a pretty strict form of applied behavior analysis. So I got recruited, and then I started working for all of these different agencies doing in-home programs. I ended up getting my special ed certification because at some point during my CET career, they required it in New York State. So, and then I got a job out in DDI for a little bit. That's not on my resume, so if you look me up, that's not there. I was only there for like 6 months or so, and then I kind of jumped ship and moved over to Northport. And then from there, I kind of moved over here. That's me. And what I'm doing here is, it's pretty fun. It's pretty fun. I'm working over at Homestead a lot. I'm also working over at the high school a lot. And then, sometimes I touch base with different schools. Good morning. How are you? We're going to keep this conversation on Mrs. Mullins. So feel free to jump in when you can. Ask questions too. They got me, primarily working with kids with behavioral needs. We're doing a lot of classroom management type stuff, creating behavior intervention plans after conducting functional behavior assessments. They got me doing this stuff. And then just, some trainings for staff, just general trainings. Like up at the high school, we did a general training just about autism. And then next Monday, we're going to do more specific departmental trainings. So that's what they got me doing here. I'm doing some parent training as well. There is a district parent training that is offered to individuals with IEPs with a specific parent, right? It's maybe. Okay. Yeah, and what that is, it's just a pretty scheduled every third. Thank you for pointing that out. Every third Monday of the month. There's just a topic that I go over. A lot of times people don't show up, so it ends up kind of just going into whatever anybody wants to talk to when we're there. And then, just meeting other IEP mandates, they have me doing some parent trainings too. So that's me. So today, what I was asked to talk about is functions of behavior. I could press continue, right, Miss Dickey? Consenting to be recorded. Today they asked me to talk about functions of behavior. And it's a loaded question. Can you talk about functions of behavior? Because functions of behavior, it involves so much more than just functions of behavior. And we could touch upon that. So if I am going fast, we can at the end kind of just, or even in the middle or during or throughout, we could just talk about our own personal experiences or any types of questions. So first thing I like to start with is a working computer. No, here we go. I am going to keep it ABA-ish because I don't know how to get that. Apparently, my wife tells me all the time, like, people don't think like that. They're not as technical as that. So I have to be honest, and it will be a little bit ABA-ish. But I will try and keep it more natural so that we can talk about the real world applications of what we'll be discussing. This is a brief introduction. I might get a little technical, but I don't think it's going to be over technical. I think when I do this type of psychoeducation, I like it to be technical. I like you guys to understand the words that we're using and the terms that we're using, just so it's familiar. I think in education, we do have a different language, and a lot of times our educational language, sometimes we're talking to a parent, we don't even realize that, yeah, they don't speak that way. So I do want to keep it a little bit technical as well, just so you kind of know and you're familiar. Let's start with the basics. What is behavior? A lot of times we talk about behavior as being good or bad, but there's so much more to it. I think the most important thing is that any form of behavior is communication. It's telling us something. We can't, in the ABA world, and I'm hoping after this, we're not just classifying our kids' behavior as good or bad, but rather, in terms of what it looked like and possibly why it was happening. In the ABA world, we define behavior operationally. We break it down to the most observable and measurable terms, so that the reason we do that is so that anybody that kind of, if we're talking about behavior, let's say I'm talking to Dr. B about a kid's behavior, I want her to be going into the classroom looking at that exact thing that we'll be talking about. So that's why we do it in observable and measurable terms. It seems like overkill sometimes, but there's a reason for it. Some behaviors, and we'll talk about this, some behaviors serve a specific function and other behaviors serve a different function. So when we are speaking about behaviors in school, I want to be very specific about the behavior that we're looking at. Sometimes different behaviors serve the same function too, and we'll talk about that too. The other reason why we talk about behavior in observable and measurable terms, it removes the subjectivity or assumptions about the behavior. A lot of times, even when I'm speaking with my wife about my daughter, I got two daughters. I got Olivia, she's 8, and Emily, she just turned 5 on Monday. Even when I talk to my wife, Emily had a tough day. What was she doing? She was kicking Olivia. Why was she doing that? She was angry. Right, but why? What happened before? So my wife's like, I don't know, she was angry. So, but it's an assumption. We assume that she's angry. We can't observe or measure that anger as much as we can what happened prior and what happened after the behavior. So, for instance, if Olivia took Emily's toy, Emily kicked Olivia. Olivia gave back the toy. The reason she kicked was to get the toy back. Does that make sense? So, and that's why we kind of got to remove those assumptions and get down to the basics of the behavior. Because what we want to do for it, like that instance, we want to teach Emily there's a better way to get that toy back. You don't have to kick in order to get it. We have to teach her that replacement behavior. We're going to get into that too. Functions of behavior. We can't talk about functions of behavior without influences on behavior, and I'm gonna zip through it. But as we progress and we do, if we have any questions, we could talk about the influences on behavior. We'll also talk about topography versus function as well. When we talk it, like I was just saying, it's called the 3-term contingency in applied behavior analysis. the ABCs of behavior, the antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. We really can't talk about that behavior in isolation without talking about what happened prior and what happened after. A lot of times, even as parents, we inadvertently set kids up for failure, and we also may inadvertently reinforce some of the negative behavior by responding to it a specific way. Even as teachers and just adults, even amongst each other adults, we kind of do the same thing. So we can't really talk about behavior just in isolation without talking about what happened before and what happened after. Consequences of behavior, a lot of times when we talk about consequences of behavior, we think like a consequence is something negative. I'm going to remove his iPad if he doesn't get his H5 on the test. But it's not always negative. A consequence is just anything that happens after a behavior. Johnny scores a goal, we cheer. That's a consequence of the behavior. Johnny scored, we cheered. That's a consequence. It's a positive thing. There's two types of consequences to behavior, reinforcement and punishment, and I won't dive too deeply into that, but reinforcement is something that increases the likelihood that the behavior is going to occur again in the future. Punishment is something that is going to decrease the likelihood that the behavior is going to occur in the future. To complicate it more, there's positive and negative of both. Positive is something that you're adding. Positive reinforcement. Great job looking at me. I'm adding something. I'm adding some verbal praise to Mrs. Mullen for looking at me, hoping that she'll do it again. She probably will now avoid me for saying that. Negative reinforcement is if everybody just sits down and everybody's quiet, we won't have homework. You just sit down for this. We're removing something that's aversive. That's negative reinforcement. Positive punishment is adding something that's aversive, shock, smack. Say again? Shock therapy, yes. More homework, more chores, more time studying math. Do we have a question? Yes, so yes, and that could be, so differential reinforcement is basically just the non-contingent reinforcement of behavior that is desirable, like the other behavior that's not the interfering behavior. So let's say, for instance, there's a young guy that runs around the classroom a lot. Sometimes we put in place this differential reinforcement plan. Basically, it's really just good teaching. And that's what ABA does. It takes these just common ways of operating and makes their own terms. But differential reinforcement for a kid who would be running around the room would be just a teacher just say, I love the way you're sitting. You're sitting so nicely. Everybody's sitting so nicely. I love the way you're doing your work at your desk. It's just reinforcing the behavior that that isn't the interfering behavior, and also provides the individual with just the knowledge of what's going to get the consequence that they're looking for, if that makes any sense. A lot of times differential reinforcement doesn't necessarily meet the same function as the problem behavior, but it can help regardless. But yes, this is where differential reinforcement comes in. Good? Any other questions about it? And you could point out if I'm wrong too.
No, I just
Yep. Yeah, and we can talk more about that, definitely, because I do think that differential reinforcement is a super important antecedent intervention. And when we talk about interventions, we will talk about the antecedent interventions. A lot of times we talk about interventions as
Leslie, something happened.
something as a result of behavior, like you get extra iPad time if you behave well in school. But we can talk about the antecedent interventions as well that can get a kid to behave well in school. I think I'm going too fast, but I'm going to get to the functions, I swear. The other things that influence behavior is setting events. Any event or situation that increases the likelihood for the behavior to occur. So, for instance, if I walk into a hot room, there's an increased likelihood I'm going to snap at you. I hate being in a hot room. I can't really concentrate in a hot room. That's a setting event for me. Other things like some internal stuff, headaches, puberty, all of that fun stuff, medication, missed medication, scents. I walk into Sephora. It's the same thing as a hot room. You know that store, Sephora? it's an immediate, just like, just don't even talk to me. I just gotta get out of here. I don't know why I go to Sephora. In there. Sounds. So everybody is setting events, and it all depends on, what we're kind of bringing in too. So Beyond the Meats, I used to do this presentation in Northport. It was called Beyond the Meats, and you'll understand what meats is later. But basically, it's what we bring to a situation. Our own past experiences, our own adverse events in our lives. Sometimes how we were brought up or what we experience kind of influences or triggers us, or behavior might trigger something from the past, and then we don't respond to a kid's behavior the way that we necessarily would want to, if that makes any sense. But we can talk about Beyond Meats at another time. All right, functions. Nope. Topography. Before we talk about functions, is the why, the behavior. Topography is what does it look like. I gave an example here of what, how I would want to write a definition of aggression without trying to keep it as observable and measurable. Aggression in any instance in which Johnny uses a closed fist, making forceful contact, leaving a mark on the other person or object. Like that, it's very observable and measurable. If Dr. B goes in and observes a kid looking for some type of aggression, she's looking for that closed fist, that forceful contact. Anything beyond that, the kid is just tapping the shoulder. That's not aggression. It doesn't meet the definition criteria. I like to even go, we need to go a little bit further with talking about things like aggression by talking about certain dimensions of behavior, particularly intensity. There are different intensity levels of behavior. Aggression might be a grab, but aggression might be a punch. And we have to also talk about frequency and as well as duration. If there's only one instance of an aggressive behavior, it doesn't seem like, oh, that's not that, it doesn't seem that bad. But if it's of such a severe intensity that somebody got stabbed, then yeah, we really need to know about that. It's the same thing with the duration of behavior. We have to look at how long things are happening. Well, there was only one instance of non-compliance today. Yeah, but it took 4 hours for him to eventually come. So that's super important. Those dimensions of behavior we really have to be aware of as well. And then we, like I said before, we got to avoid the language that discusses feelings or intent, although these thoughts are important when discussing replacement behaviors. Yes, aggression a lot of times is influenced by some type of internal emotion. And if there's any BCBAs in here, don't kill me for saying this, but this is where the cognitive behavior therapist in me comes in. The feelings do influence our behaviors. If we're angry, if we're anxious, if we're sad, if we're overexcited, that influences our behavior, and we should be aware of that when we are addressing behavior, because we want to be able to teach that expression of the emotion other than through behavioral means. Does that make sense? All right, good. Go.
Behaviors that other people can't, maybe something like turning into oneself and withdrawing. So,
Yeah.
how do we measure and observe that?
Sure. Yeah. Go.
Kids that have anxiety that disappear into or imaginary scenarios versus dealing with what's in their environment. I think that's also kind of internal.
Sure. Yeah. We are going to talk about that, because it's super important. I do think we can delineate between those two, actually, because I do think that sometimes kids go internal for some type of sensory reason. I think we all do at some point. But sometimes if we go too internal, sometimes it might be related to something more, maybe something more emotional, something more like sadness or dysphoria or something along those lines. But we'll talk about that, because I swear I'm getting to the functions. Functions is why, and bring that back up, please, because I do want to talk about that, because that is the most difficult function of behavior to kind of address, is that internal stuff. Yeah, yeah, especially with teenagers. Yes, yes. Well, that's that. You know what? Olivia's 8. I'm dying. I'm dying with Olivia. Functions. Why? Functions all about why the behavior occurs. Functional means that the engaging in certain the behavior pays off. It's functional. It's effective. It works. And because it works, it then increases likelihood that it's going to happen again. I got these 2 little girls who I also have. I have my jobs to do. My job on Sunday is to go to Stop and Shop, and I always like to bring one or both of my kids. And it's different when I bring one over the other. Olivia, she's 8 years old. Like the other day we pulled in, she's like, "That's 15-minute parking, Dad." I'm like, "I know, we're gonna get done in 15 minutes." She's like, "I think it usually takes us longer." I said, "No, we're gonna set the timer." And what I had told her, I said, "And if we get done, if you help me get done, then you're not gonna have to clean your room later. I'll do it for you." Squishmallows all over the place. You know squishmallows? Oh, God. You're lucky. So we get there and we set the timer, and I gave her tasks. I said, we're gonna get to the a specific aisle. I'm gonna have you run up and run down, and she did. It was really cute. And we get to the checkout, and the timer goes off. She didn't make it. We didn't make it. I said, "No, but you worked, and we missed it by 1 minute. We really did. It was good." I was impressed, actually. But I did. I still delivered that reward. On the other hand, so I'm trying to condition Olivia. Like, "Olivia, you're going to help me, and you're going to get something for helping me." I'm trying to condition Olivia. On the other hand, Emily, she's conditioned me. Emily, you got to come stop and shop with me. No, no, you have to, Mama. Mama's got to get some stuff done. I want Pringles. All right, we'll get Pringles. I swear, we'll get Pringles right when we get in. And then at the end, she's like, "I don't want to do this." So that's what happens with Emily. When we get there, instead of taking my normal route, I have to go get the Pringles. We have to open up the Pringles. I give her the Pringles. Wow, it's like she's got me completely just conditioned. I'm screwed. And then at the end, because then we go back around, and the last part is the florist department. And she says, "If you want me to come next time, you got to get me flowers." I'm like, "I would have done it anyway. You don't have to threaten me." But she basically, she's conditioned me. But why do I do that? Why do I give her the Pringles? Because I want to increase the likelihood that she's going to come back. Why do I give her the flowers? I want to increase the likelihood that she's going to come back. Why do I remove the cleaning of the room? Because I want to increase the likelihood that they're going to come back with me. So function is why. Questions about that before we get into the specifics? I keep it as meats because medical is you always got to rule that out first, particularly teenagers, particularly when hormones start kicking in. We got to rule that out first before we start talking about behavior. Those setting events, that lack of sleep, the potential for headaches, migraines, when a young lady, starts getting her period, things like that, we have to consider and rule out first. And the reason we have to is because we have to be sensitive to that. If somebody's experiencing, let's say, their menses for the first time, we're really going to press them the same way that we would if they didn't. And I'm talking about kids with, specific vagin conditions, or if not. But no, I think that we should adjust a little bit. If the kid has a headache, then we talk a little bit quieter, or we provide them with that space. So I think that that's super important before we start intervening on behaviors. We have to rule out anything medical first. The other ones are escape, attention, tangible, and sensory. Meats. That's the meats. We'll go through each. Am I going too fast? Too slow? Too loud? Escape avoidance. I use this frequently. I work a lot, so I got that private practice, so I work a lot just to avoid having to do the bedtime routine. This behavior, the function is to get the individual out of something, typically an aversive situation. So yes, I work a lot. I go to my office after I leave here, and I'll stay until 8:15. Then I'll go to the gym just to avoid having to put the kids to bed. It's the truth. And then my wife gets mad at me, and then we go out to dinner, and it makes everything better. Escape is when the aversive situation is occurring. So let's say, for instance, it's raining, and then you have your umbrella, and then to escape the rain, you put the umbrella up. Like you're already in the situation, and you want to get out of it. You want to escape it. You put the umbrella up. Avoidance is like when the situation is not yet begun. So before you step outside, you're already putting the umbrella up. So that's avoidance. You think about student feigning illness. I got to go to the nurse. You know, you're going to math class. You know, you have a test. I got to run to the nurse. They don't feel good. They're avoiding having to take that math test. Child throws a tantrum, get out of cleaning up toys. Parent gives into a tantrum to stop the tantrum. What do I mean by that? We're trying to escape it. So the tantrum's happening. And a lot of times what parents do is in order to escape that tantrum, we give into it. If that makes any sense. It works. It's effective. Okay, I'll give you that toy. Just shut the hell up. I'm trying not to swear. I'm in an elementary. Sorry. My nerves do that to me. So yeah, so even parents kind of escape certain things, but that's not good if we're giving in. Go.
Let's say the child is very the escape avoidant behavior is occurring at someone speaking because, you know, receptive and expressive language and expression is still difficult.
Sure.
So let's say as a parent who's either talking more slowly or you stop talking altogether, the behavior is that. Are you at that point giving into the demand?
So giving into the desire for the kid to escape, yes, potentially, which may or may not be a bad thing. And this is where I do dance because I don't know the specific situation. But if you're doing that at the same time teaching a replacement behavior of I'm having trouble listening to you right now. There's too much noise. We're teaching that replacement behavior, that optimal response to a situation. Then yeah, it's okay to reinforce. It's okay to stop talking if they engage in that replacement behavior. Does that make sense?
Right.
So if we're
So like, can I take a break from the conversation?
Yep.
Stop talking.
Yes. As opposed to yelling at you and running away or something like does that make but yes, would we be feeding into it by stopping talking? Yes, but again, we have to go back to that idea of that medical situation. We have to be sensitive to the deficits that are presented to us. You know, we don't want to be overly verbose to somebody who has a receptive language deficit. We want to kind of find that healthy balance of pushing it, you know, training it, but also not overwhelming it, right? Right. Going back, attention. I love attention. Behavior is functioning to get attention, either positive or negative. A lot of times I get asked, like, why does he? We give him positive attention. Why does he engage in negative attention? Negative attention is that much. It's that much more effective. It's so much easier to make a fart noise in the back of the classroom and have all your buddies laugh, as opposed to getting that 100 on the test and getting that student of the month. Like it's just that much more effective. It's efficient. Attention comes different forms: words, body language, heavy sigh, eye roll, raised eyebrows, smile, thumbs up. So attention, it doesn't have to be words. It could be anything. When I work with a lot of staff, that's something it's very difficult to convey, that sometimes their behavior is kind of feeding into it inadvertently. So, a heavy something like that is still attention. Kid might not necessarily like it, but he knows that just got you attention. It got the attention, so he's more than likely going to do that behavior again. Kids are in tune. They see those eye rolls. They see those raised eyebrows. At the same time, they do see those smiles and those thumbs up. So we want to, you talk about that differential reinforcement. Go back to that. I always like the 4-to-1 ratio for, especially for young kids. For every one thing that you're telling a kid that they're doing wrong or that they should be doing differently, tell them 4 things that they're doing well. Like, I love the way you're sitting here listening to me. I love it so much. You guys are so attentive. Like, just really catching them being good. my girls are actually playing nicely together, my inclination is to be like, all right, let them play. But in reality, that those are the moments where you got to go, and you guys are playing so nicely. I love the way you're playing so nicely. Those are the moments that you got to kind of jump in. You're studying so nicely for your math. I love how hard you work. No, this is a very small audience. Examples of attention: student raises a hand, gets called on, child says, excuse me, and a parent engages. Parent raises their voice to get I think I had a tough Sunday. Parent raises their voice to get a child to come to dinner after having asked nice. So basically, we train kids. We train kids to respond to us, or they train us. They train us. So like on Sunday, I was trying to get everybody to come to the dinner table. Nobody was coming to the dinner table, Olivia and Emily, until I yelled. That's what got their attention, is the yelling. They've trained me to get to that level, as opposed to me just saying, come to dinner, and they didn't listen, going over and getting them to come to dinner. They've trained me to get their attention by yelling. Yeah. Damn kids. Questions about attention at all? I'm going quick. Too quick, Miss Dickey? No? Tangible. This serves to gain access to a desired activity or item. Child tantrums in store to get Pringles. Parent buys Pringles. Open them. Let's get them. That's me. She got that tangible. And I got the escape, right? So student asks teacher for a pencil. Teacher gives a pencil. Yeah, kid asks for an iPad. Give them an iPad. Tangible is something that they want. A thing or an activity or a place in line. I want to be first in line. It's like a tangible type of activity. Here's the tough stuff. And before I get into this, each one of them so far, the escape, the attention, and the tangibles, it requires some different type of intervention. You're not going to be reinforcing, well, you can, but it's not always as effective. You're not going to get the same response from a kid who's so attention seeking by giving him tangibles. Sometimes it works, but not really. If they're looking for attention, then you got to reinforce them with attention. Same thing with tangibles. If the kid is running over to, touch the smart board, you're not going to reinforce them with attention. It's not going to be as effective. You are differentially by sitting so nicely. I love the way you're sitting, but the reinforcement that they're really looking for is touching the smart board. This is where it gets very difficult with the sensory and automatic behaviors. They're so internal, and it's very difficult to kind of reinforce somebody who is engaging in internal type of behavior, that automatic, that behavior, that internal thought, or something that gives some type of automatic reinforcement. Rocking back and forth, flapping fingers, going internal in terms of running scripts in their head, rubbing hands on certain textures, other private events. You think of other sensory activities. Let's say that kids become teenagers, that they do things. All right, the private events. All right. So this is the stuff that's very difficult to reinforce, particularly if it's happening and interfering throughout the day, interfering with progress with education, interfering with morning routines. Let's say kid trying to get a kid out of the house, and they're just engaged in this script in their head, or they need to go through some type of routine to kind of just make themselves feel good. This is the most difficult.
Would you say that those requires an external change in the environment?
Say that again.
Would you say that the only thing that's going to shift this behavior is like an external change in the environment, since whatever's happening is self-reinforcing?
Yes, no, yes, and no. The best way to respond to this is to teach that time and place, and I'm sure you guys have heard that before. So, for instance, I like wine. It gives me some type of sensory feedback. You know what? I'll say it a little bit more appropriately. I like to go for a run. It gives me some type of enjoyment. It makes me feel good inside. But I can't go for a run right now. I can't have a glass of wine right now. I have to wait until after work in order to do that. It's the same thing with with kids, you want to teach them a time and a place. Like, yeah, you can go internal. It's okay to go internal. It's okay to seek that automatic reinforcement. But right now we're doing math, so let's do math, and then you can do that. But if they're refusing to or if they're having difficulty, then yeah, changing the environment can sometimes help, whether it's the internal environment or the external. A lot of times, medication helps with this type of stuff. Am I a proponent of medication? Not necessarily. I am a behaviorist. I like to try behavioral interventions first, but a lot of times the sensory stuff, it does require some type of medical intervention. Not always. I don't want that to be a blanket statement at all.
I think he was just three. We just potty trained him. He was new to wearing underwear. I don't know why I thought this was helpful, but I used to give those like sport boxer briefs. But having just come out of diapers into boxer briefs, he was fascinated by his own penis moving inside of the underwear, and we just spent way too much time paying attention to it. So I simply went to the store and bought a bunch of actual briefs where nothing moved and it felt more like a diaper, and the problem was gone.
Sure.
So that's what I'm saying is it sometimes more effective to find what to change in the environment just to avoid the stimulation to begin with?
Yes.
Okay.
Like, that's perfect. That's a perfect antecedent intervention. Like, what can I do to stop this behavior from occurring even before it occurs? That's an antecedent intervention. Yes, that's fantastic. That behavior is going to come back at some point. I'm sorry.
But for the short term.
Yeah. No, definitely. And then that's when you teach that, when it does come back, that's when you teach that time and place. But yes, that's an antecedent intervention that would, let's avoid the problem. Let's avoid him having his hands in his pants while I'm talking to, family members. Yeah.
Right. Because last time the conversation was more, taking a stick and digging in some field during track. Okay, we do that outside of school because there's nothing going on and all the kids are doing it. You're at track and you are with a group of boys. However, nobody else has a stick digging in the dirt, time and place. So I don't know if it's going to be effective at this age, but I guess down the road it will be.
So you want him to kind of engage with other kids.
The situation. You're not doing something wrong. It's
Nope.
wrong for the situation.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to shame the kid, particularly like let's go back to that original example of him, discovering himself. Oh, what's that? That moves. You don't want to shame him. Yeah, you got a body part. It's interesting. It's you don't want to shame him, but this is not the time and place to be doing it. So let's put on different underwear. It's the same thing with sticking the dirt. Like, yeah, you're a boy. Yeah, you can do that. But right now, you're supposed to be playing baseball or whatever. Yeah. Questions?
For instance, my son Thomas, sometimes he's musical, sometimes he's totally aware, and sometimes I think he's not.
Yeah.
And one day after school, he said, the little girl in his class, or in his buddy class, said, we don't come in front of class. So it's relationships.
Sure.
So how much attention do you draw to it? Because I also know that it gives him a lot of relief too sometimes. Yeah.
So sorry,
and this is
guys,
where
we
get
can't hear
into
the question.
intervention, because if it is truly sensory in nature, if it truly is sensory in nature, then like if he's doing it and he's not looking for attention and he's not looking to get out of anything. Let's say he's just playing and he's humming and he's just having a good old time. Then it is more sensory. It's probably soothing. It probably makes him feel good. And that kid is right. Yeah, in that class, we don't do that here. So this is where replacement behaviors come in, and this is where sensory comes. It's so difficult to replace a sensory behavior because how can you replicate that sensation that he gets? Sometimes you can replace it with an alternate sensory form, whether it's some type of tactile or some type of taste or something along those lines.
I had a speech therapist that recommended crunchy snacks at lunch because that gives sometimes enough order.
Similar vibrations, yeah. And this is, so that's another thing. One thing I learned real quick in behavior analysis is to not operate in isolation. I rely on speech pathologists. I rely on occupational therapists. I rely on parents just for an understanding of what can the alternative be. Particularly OT and sensory. I think that they are a little bit more in tune to that than me. But yeah, you would try and provide that replacement behavior in that specific environment while still teaching, but there is a time and a place for this. Everything, you would be all right if you do it over here, but in that class, here's what you can do. Not easy at
It's
all.
not, and I'm not a fan of it, because my son thinks to himself too, and it's also very important. It's not to get the OT has listening to music to get a different part of the body, the brains. Right. So I don't know if it's going to be a durational thing where over time they'll be listening. That's her approach.
I'm sure we're aware of this, but behavior can serve multiple functions. We good? I mean, I didn't want to overstep. What time is it? 10:50. What I've been talking about. Behavior can serve multiple functions. So yes, there are 4 functions of behavior, but behavior can serve multiple functions. So you think about the kid that makes silly noises when the math test is handed out. That not only is he getting the attention from his knucklehead classmates, but the teachers are, you're out of here, and he's now escaped the math test. Same thing, time to clean up. There's a tantrum. There's avoidance of the cleaning up, and then the parent soothes the tantrum. You're getting that attention as well. One typography can serve multiple functions. Many typographies can serve the same function. You think about it, kids seeking attention by making noises, by tapping you, by punching you, by running away from you. Those are different typographies. Those are different behaviors that still serve a similar function. And then one type of behavior can serve multiple functions. I don't think I have much more. So I think this is it. Does anybody have any questions about that, the multiple functions? A lot of times, kid is doing something for attention, and all of a sudden it turns into escape. A kid doesn't know how to raise his hand and say, I want to, I have the answer to that. So if they don't know how to do that, their anxiety might get up, and then all of a sudden they're trying to get out of the room. And now they're running. It's no longer attention seeking. So it gets complicated, and you got to kind of have some type of intuition. You got to work as a team. Intervention. If we could talk more about this, I could do this again. We could talk more about specific interventions, particularly about the antecedent interventions. So when we are trying to change behaviors, we are intervening before behavior occurs and as well as after. So we're providing specific consequence. So if we take that idea of setting events, and let's say, for instance, a warm room increases the likelihood of problem behavior, a simple antecedent intervention for that would be to ensure that there is a cool room. If there is no way to do that, then we ensure or teach replacement behavior of, I need to get the heck out of here. We teach that. I need a break. And then, in terms of consequent, the way we reinforce after behavior, if somebody's able to maintain themselves in a warm room that they don't want to be in, we reinforce them gradually over time to increase the amount of time that they spend in that room. So, for instance, you spend 5 minutes in here. If you spend 5 minutes in here, then you get what? Pringles. And then we gradually increase it to however long we need them in there. Functionally based, the interventions have to be functionally based. Doesn't mean that we can't provide attention for somebody who's seeking tangibles. It can help. There's no way around it. But functionally based, training a group of behaviors that serve the same function but with differing topographies. So we want to train those pro-social behaviors as opposed to the interfering behaviors. Replacement behaviors are those pro-social functional equivalent to the interfering behaviors. FERB is just functionally equivalent replacement behavior. That's the term that you might see if you do any reading or research on this stuff. Data collection is super important. Even parents, if you guys can just take just anecdotal data, if you're noticing some changes in your kids' behavior, just jot things down. What happened before? What was the setting? How many people were in that setting? Was it loud? Was it hot? Did they eat before? That's all super important information and data that can kind of show some type of pattern. In schools, I certainly wouldn't want homes to do this, parents, but you can. We go through a process. If does anybody have any questions before I get to go? Yeah, it's tough.
It's tough because you're told to leave it alone, but it is sensory based.
Yeah, and listen, I think that in those circumstances, you have to consider the context. Like, again, I think that idea of support, it's spinning support, it's working all over the place. But it has not an appropriate kind of place to do it. So in that type of circumstance, I would look at the habit behaviors. So if the kid is walking nicely with their hands in their pockets, that's what I would be reinforcing. I love the way that you walk so nicely and support in the pockets. It's just that we're working toward, trying to spin, support, something along those lines. You want to train that time and place at the same time you're training the habit overall or alternative. That's what makes sense. Same time, we would want that expression. I like kids to be very specific with their expression of emotions. I'm feeling very excited today. Take a break. That's optimal. That's optimal. But we want to train, or connect that spinning with some type of just expression. So I'm excited. I'm excited. If you think that that's what it is, that's more accurate, is spinning excitement. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And if that's excitement, I'm excited. Or I'm nervous. You know that again, that intuition kicks in. I'm excited. I'm nervous. Tell me that I'm nervous. What were you doing when you're nervous? I'm excited. Reach out, tell me that you're excited. Outside of spin, so it's not. So that's kind of what I would want to do. Again, without being there with you and see the data, I would say that that's exactly what we do. That's the direction that we want to go.
Guys, I'm sorry, we can't hear you on Zoom.
Anybody else?
Sorry, we can't hear you.
FBAs, when in school, we go through classroom, if there's, even if one kid is having difficulty in a specific class, we try and look at the, just how the classroom is being managed, what the behavior management plan is in for the entire class, and whether or not it's addressing the kid's specific needs. If it's not, then we might have to go to some types of informal, thank you for coming, informal interventions for the kid that's in addition to the classroom management plan. And if that's not working, then we'll jump into that FBA and we'll start taking the data to really look at the functions of the behavior so that if need be, we develop a behavior intervention plan that is very functionally based. So that's what we do in school. If FBAs don't work, there is something that's a component to FBA that we typically don't do in school that we used to do in the center-based program. It's just a functional analysis, and that's when we're really manipulating all of the environmental stimuli. It's just the whole process. It's just a very specific way of teasing out functions of behavior. It's not necessary always, but go ahead.
So, I'm going to hop back to my question.
Sure.
I'm going to hop back to my question before about those behaviors that are more difficult to outwardly see. How do we document those so that we can present them to our supports within the school, and maybe to our supports outside of school?
The reason I'm going to ask this next, so how do we document some of those internal behaviors that parents are seeing so that it can be helpful for the school and the treatment of the behavior, right? That's the question. I'm going to preface my response by saying a lot of times you will see a behavioral contrast in different environments. And a lot of times there might be improvements in school, but there might be significant declines at home. How do we, so we would need to we would go back to the topography of the behavior. So in school, the aggression might be, hitting or something like that. And that might be related to some type of frustration or anxiety or some type of emotion. At home, that emotional response might not be aggression. It might be retreating from, family. Can you give me an example of what's happening without being too specific? You don't have to.
Situation where when the kid gets home, they're absolutely fine, but the behavior is actually different at school.
Okay.
Not engaging, what else? Retreating into themselves, instead of the fight, instead of running out the door and looking, just sort of hanging out in the back of the classroom, just by themselves.
Yeah.
No attention.
Yeah. So that's when it would, I would move. Obviously, behaviorally, we could document, how often they're engaging with others and how frequently they're responding to questions. We could do that. We could look at it like that. Then we could go through the functions of behavior in terms of avoidance or escape or whatever it might be, escaping attention, whatever it might be. Then we could talk about how to reinforce somebody for kind of, doing the opposite, engaging kids that maybe you might not want to. We could talk about that behaviorally, but emotionally, and this isn't FBA stuff, this is CBT type stuff. If there is anxiety present, what we want to do, where anxiety comes from is this perception of a threat, real or imagined. And what happens is that there's this thought, there's this perceived threat, the body reacts, the heart starts to race, the palms get sweaty, the mind gets a little bit foggy. And because the body's reacting, the mind is convinced, like, no, there is a threat. I don't see it. I don't know where it is. I don't know if it's real, but it's there because my body's reacting. What I like to do with that is I like to try and, what is that what if thought? What is that thought that's leading to that perception of a threat? What if these kids don't like me? What if they laugh at me if I speak? What if they don't invite me to a birthday party? I would try and identify that what if thought or that anxiety producing thought that leads to that perceived threat. And then I would try and challenge that. If I was doing some work with a kid, my project, that's what I would do. I would try and challenge that. What are you thinking right now? Talk to me about that. What is that thought? Get to that what if. Write it down. And in like modality that they can kind of communicate that thought. It's very difficult even for adults to identify that thought. But I would try and get them to identify that thought. And then I would try and challenge that thought either through statistical means. Well, how many times did that when you spoke? No, 10 you speak 100, right? So 0%. So, and then also, what can you say to yourself? A lot of times with anxiety, the things that we say to ourselves leads to our behavior. So it leads to our feelings and our behavior. So if we're, I don't think they're going to like me. I don't think that they're going to like my shoes. I'm not strong enough. I'm not cool enough. The more we say that type of stuff to ourselves, the more we feel anxious, the more we will retreat. So we have to replace that thought as well. We have to not only challenge it, but replace it. So that's kind of the CBT type of response. But behaviorally, we could do that too. At the same time, you're hitting both. You're reinforcing for the engagement of others in a way that they want to be reinforced. At the same time, you're getting them to kind of be that much more self-aware of their own internal kind of communication. And yeah, it could work. It just takes time. That much more difficult with young kids. Difficult with old kids too, because it's kind of brain, but possible. Does that answer? I don't know. Without knowing it specifically.
It goes to the documentation of it now, and identification, and marking it down and saying when these episodes happen, what's the trigger, and how did the people there respond to it at the time.
Yeah.
But,
So
in order to communicate that and provide documentation.
environment, yeah. Environment, time of day, activity, who was in the room, yeah, all of those types of potential setting events. Yeah, that's what I would look at, documenting that. Sorry, I went on an anxiety discussion. It's because I'm nervous. But yeah,
It also brings a point because, you know, a child is more mature and quiet, right? You don't notice that versus the child who's throwing a tantrum. And, you know, I think that's what she's saying. How do I bring this to the attention of staff then to notice these things? But they might see it as like, you know, my child's a good kid, they're quiet, but there's more behind that.
yeah. Yep, and you talk about the topography.
But it's not.
It's a lack of. Sure. Yep. Yes. The topography. Yeah, it looks differently in different settings, and you have to kind of define it, you know, accordingly. You know, you go back to the observable and measurable. What can you observe and what can you measure? Let's say playtime. You know, how often are they engaging with others, or how often are they, you know, sitting alone and not engaging others? What's the duration of that? How long are they doing? Yeah, they engaged a kid once, but it was for a half hour. Oh, great. They engaged a kid 12 times, but it only resulted in 2 minutes worth of engagement. You know, that's kind of what I would look at. But that's difficult to observe as well, but not impossible. Not impossible. Go ahead.
In that same reference, what if they vocalize to, I'm scared of saying the wrong thing?
I would, yeah, that's great. That's amazing. I would love it if kids said that.
But then I don't know.
That is so cool. How to follow up.
The relationship.
So you always fact check a kid, right? Like our immediate response as a parent is, you're not going to say the wrong thing. You always say the right thing. Everybody's going to love you. You're so wonderful. But the reality is, well, what is the wrong thing for you? Tell me what that is. And you fact check them, you know? You know, anything like that. Little Johnny and, yeah, just, what do you think is the wrong thing? Just really trying to develop an understanding of where they're coming from, to see where their mind goes. What makes you think that's the wrong thing? Well, one time I did that and Billy laughed. What else could Billy have been laughing about? Is there anything else that was going on? Well, yeah, Johnny was kind of dancing in the corner. You know, and just really putting it in a context that, yeah, there's other perspectives out there other than what's going on up here. But fact checking is super important. Nothing else?
What about the situation
Thought it was
when
that.
you're yelling at the kids to come to dinner? Like when you realize that you've basically set up that behavior, like 6-year-old thinks calls me about like screams from like another floor for me my brain's now. It's like
That's the same
how
thing
do
with
we
me. Listen, so I'm at fault for responding to it. Olivia does the same thing. She'll be sitting on her iPad for 2 hours and she gets a beat. And she'll be like, I'm hungry. I'm like, okay, what do you want? Like, why am I thinking? What do you want? Go ahead, get something. You know, in those types of situations, we got to look at ourselves. What have we done in the past? And what are we able to do in that moment and moving forward? So if I said to Olivia, no, you got to get up and you got to get yourself, and I actually took the iPad and said, let's put this down, come get it. See, you got your food, you're great, wonderful, you got your own food. If I did that once, I would have to do that a couple times in order for it to stick. Because if I then, the next time she yelled, I'm hungry, while she's on her iPad and I brought her her snacks, then she's always going to, that behavior is maintained. You know, that reinforcement that's intermittent. That you think about it, Jack, what's that? Slot machine. Why do people sit at it for hours? Because they don't know when the reinforcement's coming. It's the same thing with Olivia. If I just intermittently reinforce her by getting her her snack, she's always going to be screaming, I'm hungry. But if I consistently bring her to get her own snack, then she's going to stop screaming. Does that make sense? So we have to look at what we're doing.
So I
Go ahead.
abruptly because I got really tired of serving. So what I did very simply is, yourself. So now I get, since you don't do anything for me, I'm not doing anything for you as well. So can you go get me that? Go get it yourself. So I just get I get it flipped on me, but I just realized that's going to be my life. But it works. It works. You know, now there's an instinct. I'm hungry. I'm going to go to the refrigerator and see what there is.
We have to increase the value of getting kids to do what they don't want to do, whether it's homework, whether it's getting their own snack. We have to, that's on us to increase that value. We all do everything for something. A lot of times I get, we really have to can't they just learn to do it because they should do it? I'm like, yeah, but I go to work because I get paid. You know, I get enjoyment out of helping people. It's always getting something. So, yeah, eventually we want kids just to do it because they should do it, but we have to condition them to get there. If that makes any sense. If they feel hunger, yeah, we want to condition them to get up and get their own damn food. But until that, we have to kind of, teach them.
Because I have a little bit we will go get chocolate milk and chocolate chip cookies. I have to just deal with the fact that that's.
And then you got to deal with
That's the give and take, right?
Yep.
I no longer have control over what you're eating.
Yep. But again, we can speak specifically about that privately. All right, Ms. Dickey. Oh. Wait, what? Nothing? All right, give me the hook. Yeah. I got my my email up there. Feel free to email me. I hope I didn't spell it wrong purposefully. But feel free to email me. And we can call. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks everybody online.